The films which composer James Horner has written for read like a list of the blockbuster movies of the last 20 years. Braveheart, Apollo 13, The Perfect Storm, Patriot Games, Glory, Legends of the Fall, a couple of Star Trek movies, Aliens, to name but a few. In addition, he's won 2 Academy Awards for Best Score and Song for the hugely successful Titanic, the biggest-selling film score album in history. His latest work is for the historical drama Enemy at the Gates. Before we talk to him, let's take a look.
He's still here.
James Horner, pleasure to meet you.
Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
I certainly don't know where to start because you've done so many movies, but let's start with the movie you've just done that we just saw a clip of, Enemy at the Gates. This is truly an extraordinary film. Did they come to you? Did you want to do this movie? How did it come about?
I wanted to do the movie. I look for projects that interest me, and I've always wanted to do something that was of epic scale of one of these big World War II battles. And there's a love story involved, which of course interests me as well. But it was a mutual thing. I've worked with Jean-Jacques before.
The director?
The director on Name of the Rose. And we sort of, actually, I was interested in the film and he was interested in me at the same time. I think he got to me before I got to him, but it would have happened either way.
I'm curious into your process as a film composer. The first few notes. It goes from black, the lights come up, there's some sort of flicker through a camera. That must be an important moment for you. What goes through your mind with those first few notes?
When I see a film for the first time, it's usually in a very rough state. It's not at all finished or polished. Usually it's 4 or 5 hours long, if not longer. It's not down to the releasing length. It's a real work in progress. But when I see it, I get a gist, a feeling of what the film's going to be. And immediately in my mind, what I start doing is thinking about the type of sound that portrays the emotions I feel. I don't think about melodies or tunes or anything like that. That's very literal. I think much more in terms of the colors. Is this something that is going to be best expressed by some sort of weird Japanese flute, or is this going to be expressed by a single voice, or is this going to be expressed by a choir, or is it playing synthesized, or is it... And I tend to approach the colors very much like that.
So once you've seen the film, and you get this, you start to wonder about orchestrations and what kind of things you're going to get. Do you sit at the piano and do melodies come to you? Do you work at a computer? What's the process?
My process is, I watch the film, and immediately thousands of ideas come. It's just an instant sort of response. And I go home and I doodle, not at a piano, but on a piece of paper. I play the piano, but I find that I don't compose at a piano. Your hands fall into patterns over time, and I don't like that to happen. I'm sort of more, it's much more like I come home and I start charcoal drawing quickly. It just happens to be notes instead of curvy lines, but that's very much my process. It's sort of...
You hear it in your head?
Yeah, I hear it in my head, and I sketch it out, ideas and thoughts, and it takes really not very much time for the melodic ideas to sort of come together and distill.
And with a movie like Enemy at the Gates, in which we're dealing with a World War II historical drama that's based on true events, that takes place on the Russian front. Do you do research? Are there Russian melodies in here that you seek out, or is it all
No,
James Horner?
It's all James Horner. I always try and find it's funny, I don't like to use literally Russian music, but my sort of vision of what Russian, it's distilled through my filter. So it ends up being not absolutely pure or absolutely real, but it's as close as I want it to be. I wanted to write something that was much more spare. And so I tended not to write music for the big battle scenes. I let them do the sound effects and play the sound effects for that. And I tended to use a lot of choir, which becomes more reflective, and you end up commenting on the aftermath of what you're seeing. So it somehow becomes sadder.
Do you work with the director for those moments? Do you say, I don't think I want to write anything here. I think this ought to be silent, or it just ought to be the ambient sound?
The process is really as follows. I see the film in a rough state. I go home and think about it and doodle in whatever fashion I doodle. Eventually, the director will ask to hear and talk about my musical ideas, and we'll have another conversation. And out of that, the next step is when the film is actually finished editing, when there are no more changes, theoretically, I start going through the movie, sequence by sequence with him, talking about, do you want music here? And if we bring it in here, what about starting it here instead of here? What about not having any music at all here, but putting it in here? And we do the entire movie like that. And I then get the timings of those sequences, and then I start weaving the quilt. The hard part is the technical weaving a nice melody or a nice texture into a 9-minute battle sequence, acknowledging dialogue and big sound effects and dipping around what's going on. So you can imagine if the picture changes after I've written it,
sure,
what kind of devastation that can do, because you have to readdress the music, of course.
And I would imagine the concept of theme and variations is very important to you, establishing themes for characters or situations.
It is, and I also tend to write relatively austerely, thematically. I will write maybe 2, sometimes 3 themes, and I will weave them around in various different ways and work them. I don't tend to write a lot of themes for a lot of different people. It becomes like a Wagner opera. You try to keep track of everybody's thing, and then you establish a precedent that you can't break off halfway through because it's getting too complicated. So I tend to keep things simple.